Hello, I'm Dr. Harriet Farad.
And I'm Juliana Forlano, here with our podcast, Capitalism Hits Home.
This is a show about the intersection of capitalism with race, class, gender, and personal life.
We aim to educate, activate, and even alleviate some of the burdens we all experience living in a capitalist USA.
We hope that this program will really serve you well. It's brought to you by Democracy at Work, and our main topic for the day is to discuss Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the context of capitalism, race, gender, and personal life.
We'll also be getting to the headlines in a moment, but right now we thought we'd briefly share with you how capitalism has hit us personally in our homes since last week. Harriet, what did you go through this week?
Well, the way it really hit me was I had been away and I went back to New York and I re-experienced this huge deprivation. Part of the joy of the city for me is the random connectedness of us all, the smiles, the looks, the little conversations. And New York City is a place where you can just converse with somebody. You can start talking. No one thinks you're crazy, as long as you look fairly okay. And you can't do that anymore. People, instead of being a source for connection, are a source for contagious. And everyone who's responsible is afraid. And that's very frightening. And a deprivation. So that's what struck me.
Harriet, did you walk the streets of New York?
Yes, I did. And instead of looking and smiling and connecting, which is so easy to do in New York, everyone is a source of possible contagion. You walk around each other. 1 in about 8 people is unmasked. A lot of guys particularly, are using their masks as a chin strap, which is like having your condom 6 feet away when you want to be protected and have birth control. It's not exactly helpful.
Not
So
useful.
they're extra contagious.
Yeah. I remember when I was there, I was walking, I would smile at people even with my mask on because you can tell. And I would say hello. And people, this was at the beginning of the pandemic, maybe March, people were stunned. They were just like, It was They were startled that a person might actually say hello to them. I did it kind of for fun, but also as an act of revolt to, to say, no, we are still here. We are still human beings. We can still smile at each other. It's important to, still connect.
It is. And yet people are a source primarily of contagion instead of connection in the city. And that takes away a lot of the joy. And that's what really struck me. What struck you, Juliana?
Oh, this week? Okay. So this week, I know this is a weird personal story, but I had to have, obviously we're working over the internet as is everyone else. Mm-hmm. And so we just moved a couple weeks ago and we've had to have the Optimum guy. And I was going to say the internet guy, but I feel like we should call out the actual company.
Absolutely.
Optimum, whatever it is, Optimum, I don't know, but Optimum.
No, Optimum service, that's for sure. Right.
Yeah, some sort of service. They're our internet and our phone service. I literally, and I mean literally, when I say literally, had them have to come to our house 5 times and it's still not working properly. What with the fact that Optimum has been bought up by another owner. I believe it's a VC company, but I'm not exactly sure. All I know is when they did the purchase, they outlawed unions other than I think in New York City where they were too strong and they couldn't overpower them or somehow. So there's no unionization of the workers. The workers are being squeezed terribly to do their jobs within like a time window, which isn't really enough. I think it's a 40-minute time window. If you have to like dig a trench to lay a cord across to the thing, it's literally not enough time. And the worker themselves gets in trouble or like demerits or something if they don't perform, if they don't perform your service call, get it done in 40 minutes. The workers have been overworked. They're coming to your house with, which means during this
Mm.
pandemic, they are risking their lives to come into an area where we all know it's not just particleized, the transmission, it's aerosolized. So if I'm breathing in and out in my house and you come in here, even if I have my mask on, you're breathing what was already in here. So these people are basically risking their lives so that people can hopefully not just play video games, but do their jobs, support themselves, etc. Anyway, it was like the fifth time the guy had to come. Not to mention the call center, which has been outsourced now, and so it was just insane. And I'm sure you're all going through this too. But it was such a little thing. But basically, I couldn't work if he didn't come, and he had to come 5 different times if they couldn't get the service. Meanwhile, I'm paying for the service. It's not like they give you a break
Oh,
when
no.
so that's basically capitalism. The fact that that company has been abusing their workers, basically promising you a service that they don't deliver, still charging you for it, and making a ton of money off the backs of their workers while endangering the workers themselves. It was just like, oh, and that was one day. That was a couple hours out of one day of how capitalism was striking me this past week.
Yeah, well, it is striking all over the place. And we had thought of what would be some news stories that would be really newsworthy and important and intersect with our personal lives. And I have one that really was important to me, and because it was shocking. The majority of Americans aged 18 to 29 years old now live with their parents.
Mm. Wait, 18 to 29. The
18 to 29.
majority
Can
are
you
living
imagine
with
what
their
that
own
does to your
parent.
sex life,
Oof.
living with your parents? Can you imagine what it does to your development of independence, living with your parents? Can you imagine what it does to your parents who want privacy at last and some freedom
We're happy to
from
get rid of
child?
you.
Right, exactly. They want that empty nest that they can settle into. Now, among women who weren't counted in that majority that live with their parents, many, many more young women live with their family's relatives, which is one step away at least. And these are the worst stats since 1900 when they started
Harriet,
doing these stats. It's worse than the Great Depression, which is the
many
only one that comes near.
many of the families with young children I knew from New York, Brooklyn, they all moved in with a family member who lived outside of the city. Uh, Almost all of them just left and crowded in with a family member. And then a lot of young people who were unattached also just said, I'm going to go stay with my mom. I'll go stay with my dad. I don't know if these are permanent statistics due to the economy, or are these people just sort of camping out until, you know, COVID is all done, as if that's going to happen.
No, I don't think it's COVID oriented. I think what it is it's unemployment oriented.
Mm.
That this is the age cohort that has the worst unemployment in the United States. And everyone has bad unemployment, but they have the worst unemployment. And those that do get jobs on the average 20% at a 20% reduced pay because companies, seeing that there are so many unemployed, have taken that opportunity to cut wages.
Mm.
And therefore, the wages are cut from between 20 and 35 cents an hour.
Mm.
And so they
Mm.
can't even afford to live by themselves. And so that the whole tenor of our personal lives is being changed by the
All I know
economic
is that when I left
COVID.
for college, even the summers of going back and staying with my parents were just practically unbearable. I mean, they were decent enough people. It's not like anything really horrendous was going on, but even the family dynamic that, you're an adult, they
Or
still
are
think
you?
you're four. It's,
Right. That's right.
highly
I never
unpleasant.
lived with my parents again since I was 18. and went to college because I was a professional dancer. So when over the extended Christmas vacation, which Bennington used to save heat and said was an opportunity to work in your field, I
Mm.
toured with dance companies. And my grandmother, when I was in town, my grandmother went to Florida for the winter. And so I could live in her empty house. So even though my parents weren't thrilled by it, I was thrilled by the fact that I didn't have to live there again, ever.
Right. And now, we talked about this earlier. You and I spoke about it off the microphone about how the mental health. I don't want to step on another story, but you were saying that these levels of people who are having mental health crises are shooting up at astronomical rates. I
They
would
are
imagine
one
living
in
at home with your
four.
parents.
Oh my God. 1 in 4 Americans has had serious suicidal thoughts. And that means that you're not just thinking, oh, I want to die. It means you're planning whether you're going to hang yourself or bleed to death or whatever. That's that level of depression. And young people are particularly afflicted because already the doors of opportunity were closing. Now they're closing on these young people's fingers,
Mm,
and they're unemployed
mm,
and don't know what to do.
mm. Harriet, was
So
there
that,
another news story that caught your eye since we
yes,
last
there
met last
was.
week?
And that is what's happening to domestic workers and hotel cleaners.
Oh yeah, what is
Domestic
happening?
workers are finding themselves really endangered because as they go into a house, several of them reported going into a house and seeing an extra bottle of Lysol and then having neighbors say, oh, didn't you know they all got COVID? And you're being invited to clean their apartment. And they don't leave a lot of protective gear either, or inform you that they're going because either someone or everyone in their family got COVID. And what's happening,
Wow.
yeah. So they literally take their life in their hands for minimum wage. And one of the things that happened with Roosevelt's wonderfully liberating agenda is because of pressure from the southern states, they eliminated from those protections, hourly protections, basic minimum wage protections, domestic workers, maids and house cleaners, and agricultural workers because they were overwhelmingly black. And that way he got the southern states' support so that people are unemployed. And when they are employed, they're risking their lives. Hotel cleaners, the hotels have cut down their cleaning schedules because they say nobody wants a stranger, i.e., a cleaner, in their room. It's actually just so that they don't have to pay people. And so they've furloughed all of these vulnerable workers, and those that are there have to use extra caustic cleaners much less frequently so that the buildup is terrible and they're timed how long they take in a room. And they haven't given them the protective gear to protect them from the caustic chemicals they have to use because they clean so infrequently. So they are a terribly
Yuck.
vulnerable
And if you're going
population.
to a hotel, it means it's dirty and disgusting
That's
no matter
right.
where because of
That's right.
capitalism.
That's right. Thank you. Unchecked capitalism a la Trump.
I was
So
wondering what were they going to do with those hotels that they put the sort of first responders and in New York? Like they really have to clean them out, including all of
of
the
course
air
they do.
vents. I
And
wonder if
every
they
time
will.
someone, I don't know. I don't know. It may be like the story that happened about plastics, that recycling has been really touted and these companies are all for recycling. They just bury it in the ground because for most of the bottles, they're too thin and too cheap to recycle anyway. So they say they're recycling them and claim it as a virtue and plow them in the ground. So you
Oh,
really don't know.
great.
If you have an unchecked capitalism, they will do anything to make more money. That's what was
When I
brought
was
home to me by those news stories.
That's good to know. I don't know. Do you know where was that reported? I didn't even see it like anywhere in terms of mainstream coverage.
The cleaners, let's
Hmm.
see, I can look in my notes and tell you because I was a little surprised. The one with the young people living with their parents. Oh, it was in the New York Times.
Wow.
It was on September
Okay, well
11th,
that one makes
2020.
sense. I would be shocked if they covered even the story about the domestic workers.
It was kind of buried in the New York Times on September 20th.
Mm, mm. The things that caught my eye this week as I was looking, two stories. One is just the numbers. The COVID numbers were front and center, along with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing and the politics around her passing, which we are going to talk about at length as our main story. But we're just doing quick headlines here. 7 million Americans have been infected. There are 200,000 about, I believe we passed the mark, dead from COVID. 1 million dead worldwide. They're suggesting that we're on track for another 100,000 to die between now and December, and then another 100,000. So exponential growth here, basically, between December, in January. So this is pretty serious. And the thing that struck me was that people, I think it was the Washington Post, reported that people are not really even following the pandemic anymore. It's become a new normal. Everyone was talking about this new normal that was going to descend on us. And I believe the number said that even since the end of March, the number of times people are Googling for COVID numbers and information has dropped precipitously to where, I mean, I know you can get this information in the Times. You'll get it.
Washington Post.
It's pretty much, people are reporting on it, but not as much as they were. It's still a hot fire of a story, a real problem, a major disaster continuing to unfold. And there are people, even the mainstream news is not really covering it anymore. So here we are living with our parents in the new normal.
Right, which is the new disaster. Well, people feel like, oh my God, I can't stand it. I can't even hear about this anymore. Think about it. Anxiety disorders are going through the roof. Depression is going through the roof. People can't stand it. They don't feel hopeful. They're in the hands of a maniac. And they just don't want to know. It gets too painful.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're uninformed.
Although the idea for me of self-protection is always out there. And when I do a media diet or a media fast, I always feel like, did I miss, when I go back, did I miss something? Is Florida still attached to the United States? You just,
not. Right.
I literally missed the Ginsburg story because on Saturday I was doing something with my family, like apple picking. You know what I mean? We just were like, let's just do something that's natural to living.
That's right.
And
that's right. No,
yeah.
it's awful. And in addition, we've lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is an incredible fighter for justice, for gender justice, for racial justice.
Harriet, I don't want to move on to that story before we hit the second story that I brought for today, if that's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
No problem. I thought you actually might enjoy this one. It's kind of like hitting it out of the ballpark in terms of the vile, disgusting nature of what a capitalist system can do. I was like, oh, she's going to love this one. Okay. We actually have decided to surprise each other with the stories that we're bringing as a fun little thing that we're doing. So we'll see how that turns out. The story I was thinking of is there's a new public citizen report that actually documents how Amazon set prices for essential products during the crisis levels that would violate price gouging laws in many states, with many products marked up by as much as 1,000%. Mind you, the trigger in some states is 10%. If you mark something up by 10%, that's illegal. They were marking things up by 1,000%. And I can tell you, I noticed because I was on top of the mask buying before this even happened. And I bought a box of I don't know, 25 masks or 40 masks or something for $5, $4.99. And then when I went back after I had worn them all mid pandemic, they were $40. And I don't think people are running low on masks. That's kind of what they tell you. I mean, not the kind that regular people who aren't on the front lines wear when they're walking around at a distance from people. Anyway, these masks are a piece of paper, basically, 3 pieces. So that report also said about how much money that Amazon had made during the pandemic. And I'm going to give you some facts and figures here. Jeff Bezos made $48 billion between March and June. That's Jeff Bezos, one guy. He is worth $200 billion. Currently, there are 876,000 employees of Amazon who could each be given a one-time bonus of $105,000, more than a year's salary for most of the people working there. And still, Bezos would come away with as much money as he'd had before the pandemic. I mean, it's incredible. And they're hiring 100,000 more workers at minimum wage because everyone's at home and people are afraid to go out. Stores are closed. Stores are not easy to access, and they're just delivering. So, I mean, what is he doing with all that money, Harriet?
Well, he spent $500 million trying to get himself into outer space. We might want to get him into outer space too. But I mean, he doesn't feel any obligation. At his own Amazon, he was so generous. He said, if you get COVID and you need more than your 2 weeks allowable sick days, you can borrow them from someone else. That was his gift.
I remember shopping at I did the brave thing of going shopping, and there was a Whole Foods. So I went shopping at Whole Foods near my old place. And I said, you guys aren't wearing masks? I was all masked up. Mm-hmm. This was at the beginning of the pandemic. And the checker told me they weren't allowed to wear masks because
gave the wrong impression.
The policy was they didn't want to scare people in the store. So the entire staff, other than people with, I think, asthma or something, were not allowed to wear masks. That was insane. With all that money, you'd think he'd maybe put out some of those fires in Washington State where, his, at least the headquarters is. He'd want to use some of that money to do some good.
Right. But he doesn't feel any obligation. Look, there are 77 multi-billionaires in the United States. A small tax on multi-billionaires would give the cities what we need. But that isn't even
Amazon paid $0 in taxes this past I don't know about this past year exactly, but the year before, 0.
He got a refund. He got our money to refund him. He gets very good tax lawyers, which most people can't afford. So, no, it's a terrible system. It's capitalism and what it does. So we have a disaster. Instead of helping us, they're enriching themselves.
Well, it's not surprising because that's where we are. No, but it is, I don't know anything about Jeff Bezos or his history. I don't understand how someone could not feel any connection to any other people. But I mean, we have a president that way who is probably about to throw his own kids under the
narcissist. Yeah, it's pathological narcissism, that the only thing that counts is you. And you don't care that you're sickening and potentially killing tens of thousands of people. That's what herd immunity was about. Trump said, well, we'll weed out the herd. So that would have been 2 million, several 100,000 people dead. And he thought, okay, fine, as long as it isn't me.
Fine. So you're listening to our podcast, Capitalism Hits Home. I forgot to mention it after we gave you our personal stories of the little ways that capitalism had hit us at home this past week, that in our comments section, if you're watching on YouTube, you can put your Capitalism Hit Home story for the week and we will read it. I'm sure we all have plenty, but I am interested in kind of what your experience is and how it's tying to capitalism. And hopefully we'll be able to pick out some subject matter that we can do a longer story on in an upcoming episode. Harriet, our longer story for today.
is is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was an intrepid fighter for gender equality, for race equality, for justice, for immigrant rights. And she's an unusual person. In this capitalist era, we could expect more people, let's say, like Kavanaugh, someone who lies, someone who rapes, someone who gets in because he's the goes to a fancy prep school instead of the public schools that Ginsburg went into. But she was unusual. She was a principled woman who, from the
Harriet,
time,
he's younger. Do you think that it has to do with what's happened to our society, that our society
yes,
now produces Kavanaughs as opposed to Ginsburgs?
yes, and that would be, of course, who Trump would choose: another pussy grabber, another rapist, another privileged person from a fancy family who went to prep schools, and another liar.
Hmm.
So that some of it is the worst tendencies of capitalism, whose purpose is to pay people less than the profit you get from them, i.e., to cheat them, just so that you're a good businessman. That he has picked particularly infected crooks. However, capitalism brings that out. And one of the reasons that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was so unusual is she was strictly principled. And when people asked her, how did you become such an intrepid fighter for gender rights and race equality and anti immigrant sentiments? What happened? She said, well, I was discriminated against in three ways where I was an outsider. I was discriminated against as a Jew because of many places didn't allow Jews,
Hmm.
many housing complexes and jobs, no Jews. I was also discriminated against as a woman and a woman in law, strictly discriminated against. And the worst for me was I was discriminated against as a mother because,
Oh, I can relate to that.
yes, because, when she became pregnant on her first job, I think it was at the Social Security Administration, she was demoted immediately. Then, even when she was a lawyer and so was her husband, they had their son was what she called energetic and spirited, what they called disobedient and hyperactive at his school. So they'd be
Hmm.
calling her every day on her job. And one day, when she had a particularly long, exhausting brief she was writing up, she got a call from the school to come to the school because he'd misbehaved. And she said, this child has two parents, at least alternate. And afterwards, the calls went way down to about once a month. And she commented on them and said, I'm glad you call us less. And they said, well, we wouldn't want to take a man away from his important work.
Oh, excuse me
Yeah.
for swearing. Ah,
Yeah. So that she said that these three discriminations led her to be a fighter for gender equality. And part of that fight was even where she defended a man who was denied primary custody because he was a male. And she
hmm.
wanted to show how gender discrimination hurts everyone, and did.
Well,
And
that was
towards
so
the end,
genius because they wouldn't have listened to her at all if she was like, this woman is being, not treated equally. But when it was a man, and then she let the genius, not it, the principled stand, but then what she picked and how she understood the mentality to slide in gender justice for women by taking a case that had to do with a guy. It's
yeah.
just,
No, and she
she's
became
a
famous
player.
starting in 2000 because her dissents, like the dissent on the Hobby Lobby case, because she said that reproductive freedom was a question of equal rights for women under the Equal Rights and the Wage Discrimination Act. And She was defeated, but she made powerful, powerful dissents once the Supreme Court started becoming so conservative. She was an amazing woman. And her dying wish, which she articulated to her, I think it was her daughter, was do not let them pick another Supreme Court judge until the next administration comes in. And that was very powerful. And it was repeated. And in Obama's ode to her, he repeated that dying wish. She was an
Now
amazing.
Trump is out there saying that, they made that up. It's not true. But even
Yeah,
if it's not true, even if she didn't say, my point is, even if she didn't say that, we already knew that that's what she would want. I mean, give me a break. It's like, oh no, she wants Trump to pick her replacement. That just seems,
yeah.
you know,
Oh, of course. You know that.
I don't know if we want to get into the politics of what's happening. I'd rather not, because I feel like other people are going to horse race it to death,
Right.
and they're already doing that. But your particular genius about the intersection of capitalism and her work is, I think, what I'd like to plumb in terms of our conversation here. Um, and it's dizzying. There's a dizzying array of what we could talk about. What are the areas of her work that sort of touched you the most?
Well, I think the push for gender equality touched me the most. And also, it touched me to figure out and find out where she was coming from.
Hmm.
Her mother had been an excellent student and graduated at 15 years old, but
Hmm.
wasn't allowed to go to college because she had to go out and work to support her family since her older brother was going to college, was being allowed to go to college. He hadn't done so well on his grades.
Hmm.
And also, she had the experience of being top in her class at Columbia Law and on Columbia Law Review, and
Mm-hmm.
being denied a clerkship for a Supreme Court judge because
Hmm.
she was a woman. And over again, she confronted discrimination. And then when she had a child and was demoted from work when she was pregnant, for her next pregnancy, she wore loose clothes and disguised it. But, it brought home to me that although women now earn between 80 and 82% of what men earn for the same work, mothers are in a much lower category. Mothers who work full time make about 70% and are much less often promoted because if you're a mother, you don't hang out with people after work at the bar and talk about the conference. You can't go to conferences. You have to pick up your kid. You can't go to the extra staff meetings
And you
because
kind
the
of come
daycare.
across as a bitch because you're like, can we wrap this up at meetings and stuff?
Exactly. Exactly. In
Yeah.
fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg won over her colleagues when in the law organization, which they used to have at a club that didn't allow women. She said, hello. She was one of 9 women in the Harvard Law School when she went in. One
I
of
I want to
9
show you
women
this
out of
this
500, I should say.
Oh, I want to show you this. I saw that. I'm just going to show it on my phone, which you're not going to be able to see, but I'm going to read it to you. This is from Facebook, from Anne Marie Kennedy. I thought it was very well put. Women, if you have a credit card in your own name and your own credit history, if you have leased an apartment or bought property in your name, if you have consented to your own medical treatment, if you played a sport in school, you can thank Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, people
Exactly.
aren't aware of exactly how much impact she has had on the lives of women. Harriet, can you talk a little bit about what it is for women to have where were we before women had their own credit card and their own credit history, and what was opened up, which is kind of obvious, but uh, uh, as Ruth's work allowed women to be able to do that?
Well, I'm old enough that I lived through that. It meant that you couldn't start a business if you were a woman because you couldn't get credit to borrow anything. It means everything had to go through your husband. And if your husband didn't want to support your independence, too bad for you. So that, you were a lesser being annexed to your husband.
Mm.
They used to justify the different wage scales from which Bader Ginsburg suffered, earning less than her colleagues at Rutgers Law School, where she taught, because they said, well, you have a husband, he'll support you. You don't need the money. But of course, that makes you completely dependent on your husband. So you
Oh,
couldn't
they
leave.
didn't mention that in their piece on her. I heard the New York WNYC was covering how Rutgers was all sad that they at her loss and celebrating her. They didn't mention that they didn't want to pay her. How unusual, Harriet.
No, they didn't want to pay her and they excused it, saying, you have a husband, he'll support you. Women have husbands. Well, women are then doomed to have to stay with their husbands, particularly if they have children, because
What
they
if
can't
husbands are
support their
disabled
children.
or something? I mean, come
That's
on,
right. What if husbands
ridiculous.
are disabled? What if husbands desert? What if husbands divorce you? Because at that point in history, unlike now, the majority of divorces were initiated by men who want to marry younger women. Now they're initiated by women, which you were stymied. You had lower wages. You couldn't get credit. You couldn't even get birth control on your own.
You wouldn't be able to go to college really unless you were had a lot
No,
of money because you couldn't take a loan.
that's right. You couldn't take any loan out in your own name. So that you were doomed to your survival being linked to a marriage to a man.
Mm.
And she liberated us. And she tried to liberate us from the constraints that mothers face in the workforce and didn't completely succeed, but she did push for equal wages for equal work, which is very important. She was a huge force for gender equality and for men too.
Mm. Mm.
One of
Mm.
the things that came out around the time of Andrea Dworkin was she was very determined that men were not the enemy. It was the gender system that was the enemy. And that men and women, unlike what we talked about last time, Cardi B's song that men were to be used and cast aside and use sex to attract their wallets. She didn't believe in any of that. She believed that we were all humans together and that men and women should see each other as colleagues and equals.
Mm.
She didn't have that vindictiveness. And she had a very long, I do think this is relevant. She was married to 56 years to another lawyer called Marty Ginsburg, and he did all the cooking. And he did at least as much of everything else because it was an equal partnership. And
He
so
was
she
also a
believed
feminist.
and he was a feminist. And he even put out a cookbook of his recipes. But
Mm. Oh, that's
she
that's great. I
lived
love it.
her principles. She didn't articulate something and live something else.
Mm.
And I say this while we look at a president who has 3 wives, cheated on all of them. And there is a sense of people who can make a commitment, who can work things out, who are serious, and who believe in equality all the way from the household to the top of the corporate ladder. And she did believe in that, and so did her husband, Marty Ginsburg, who died before she did.
Mm.
But I think one of the things that kept her alive as long as she was alive with cancer and other things was she was determined to fight for gender equality
Mm.
and justice. She was very active opposing the Muslim ban that was allowed to go through and writing a biting dissent about what it meant. And in her attack on the decision that allowed Hobby Lobby to save money by saving birth control prescriptions for its female employees, that it was just a capitalist guise using religion. She was adamant about the injustice of that.
Do
So,
you know what her stance? I'm assuming she was on the right side of history in terms of the Citizens United vote, but I didn't have a second to even.
She opposed it. She opposed Citizen United being big corporations being treated as individuals. She really had a sense.
How can we get big corporations to be treated as individuals when you can't even get women to be treated as equal individuals? It's just not right.
True. Well, if you want to distort anything you can to reward your friends who got you elected with their money, then you can do contortions in order to do so. We've seen it. We've seen Barr at the Justice Department acting as Attorney General, personal representative for Trump instead of to represent us, and to get away with it by twisting the law.
Harriet, would you believe that we have been talking for 45 minutes?
No.
It feels like we just started.
It did.
It just really feels like we've only barely scratched the surface. But I think we're getting close to our time.
I think so too. And I think we're right to honor Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who wasn't overtly anti-capitalist, but she was not captured by the joy of exploiting other people and making more money for herself. She was a force for justice across the board. And we mourn her.
Well said.
So we should say goodbye.
Thank you. Yeah, we have to say goodbye. Thanks, everyone, for watching us. We hope you're enjoying the new format. The podcast has been made possible by Democracy at Work, and we ask that you support the project at patreon.com/capitalism hits home. You can visit us at democracyatwork.info to help, if you want to democratize your own workplace. That's excellent. If you'd like to put suggestions for news stories or topics that you want covered, that you want to hear Harriet's brilliance on, and my occasional
and your brilliance too.
Thank you. Thank you. That's nice. I was like, I think I'm coming to an edge of what I can say about myself. Anyway, put your comments into the YouTube, and you can send us your feedback. We really love hearing from you. Subscribe to us, share. Harriet's personal website is harrietfraud.com, HARRIET FRAAD, 2A's.com. And you could find me at Juliana Forlano on Twitter. Democracy at Work is on Instagram at Democracy at Work. How convenient. You don't have to remember anything else. They're also on Twitter there. So find us, follow us. We're very happy to be doing this. Final words, Harriet?
Thank you very much. We want your comments. We need your feedback. We want your news stories too. And so we hope to see you next time.
Yeah, we'll be here next week. That's another news piece too, that we're probably going to be doing this a little more often.
Good. Yes.
Thank you so much. We'll catch you next time.
Bye-bye.